Thank you very, very much. And I apologize to all of you. We're just having computer problems. Forgive me for that. I left you the last time talking about Hitler's accession to power. Very, very briefly now, very briefly, because I want to get into Poland. The Nazis came to power on January 30th of 1933. They came not, excuse me, not via revolution, but via the ballot box. They had a plurality of the vote, 37.6% of the popular vote, to the point where the president of the Weimar Republic, the great General von Hindenburg, Germany's greatest war hero, didn't like Hitler at all, but again, as I told you the last time, believed that the only way that Germany could be governed was the fact if Hitler was included in the government. And what would happen would be his son and other people who are close to his son promised von Hindenburg that, you know what, we can frame him in. Well, they didn't frame him in. From 1933 to 1939, the Nazis carried out what is called in German the Gleichschaltung. That means the consolidation, or literally the synchronization of power. He did this in a number of ways. That is getting the support of the army and of the police and virtually lots of people, we can say lots of people in the German government. What is important for our purposes is that from January 30th to really the outbreak of the war and even beyond the war, Hitler's government carried out an assault against the German Jewish population. In 1933, there were approximately 520,000 Jews in Germany. And what's going to happen now is wave after wave, legislative decree after legislative decree, that's going to really put great pressure upon the German Jewish community. The most important of those assaults is going to take place in September of 1935. These are the Nuremberg racial decrees. So some of them are, again, you may be familiar with some of them, but the most important of them was that German Jews are now called or referred to as subjects of the Third Reich. They are no longer citizens of Germany, they are subjects of Germany, subjects of the new Nazi government. In addition to that, there were all sorts of things. How do you define a Jew? And also sexual intercourse between Jews and Aryans was considered, the German expression would be Rassenschande, racial shame. It would reach its peak on November 9th, this assault, November 9th of 1938, with, of course, what is called Kristallnacht. The problem for the Nazis, as they looked at the German Jewish community, is that German Jews were not leaving Germany fast enough. That was the major issue. By, let us say, only by November 9th of 1938, only 1/3 of German Jews had left the country. That wasn't fast enough for the Nazis. In addition to that, within the Nazi party hierarchy, there was competition to gain Hitler's favor. And the best way to do that was to really outflank anybody on the issue of anti-Semitism. Whoever was the greatest anti-Semite would get Hitler's favor. And so when a German official was killed by a Jewish refugee in Paris, what took place was this is used as a pretext for the Nazis' assault on the Jews. The assault, that is the attack on the German official, is November 7th in Paris. By the morning of November 9th, he's dead. And Nazis, remember, I think I told you this last week, November 9th is a very important day in the history of the Nazi Party. That was the date of the abortive putsch, November 9th, 1923. To commemorate that day, every November 9th, leading Nazis went to the beer hall in Munich and then marched to the place where the putsch had taken place. The abortive had taken place.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We just have some comments that the light from the fan is covering part of your face. If you could just scoot yourself a little bit to your right. Otherwise, you have a lovely halo.
How is this? Any better?
Everyone? Can I get some thumbs up, everyone? Yeah. Okay, we're going to go with that.
All right. So the news comes in, all these bigwigs, Nazi bigwigs, are at the beer hall in Munich. They hear this, and Goebbels, an SOB if there ever was one, now tells the party, this is the time, he doesn't use this expression, this is the time to sock it to the Jews. And what's going to go happen? They run to their telephones, and Nazi party, Nazi party leaders now make the calls to local Nazi party officials, hit the Jews. So a wave of attacks all over Germany, all over Austria, which is now part of Germany, all over the Sudetenland, that part of Czechoslovakia that the Germans had taken. All of this is taken. All of this is, as I say, there are assaults now upon the Jews. Synagogues are destroyed. Jews are arrested. Close to 20 to 30,000 Jewish males were arrested in this period of time. A period of rape. Yeah, if you shoot back at me, this is Rasenschan that they shouldn't do it, but they do it. Men are men. They are going to exploit these Jewish women and girls, and they're going to destroy Jewish property. It is a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe, for German Jewry. The result is going to be that Jews now, if they can get out, but remember, it is very difficult to get out. It's difficult to get out, but you can get out. It's extremely difficult to get into another country. We will deal with this in another lecture. But I will tell you is you can get out. Difficult, but you can get out. It is very difficult to get a visa to get into another country. Nonetheless, 1/3 of German Jews leave the country. So what I'm talking to you about is Hitler wants to make Germany Judenrein, clean of Jews. He will come close to doing that once the war begins. Beginning in 41 and 42, the remaining Jews in Germany are going to be rounded up. If they have not gone into hiding, they're going to be rounded up, and they're going to be placed on trains. Some will be sent to Riga, to the Riga ghetto that the Germans have set up, and shot there, killed there. Some will go to Theresienstadt, a concentration camp that we'll talk about later. From there, nearly all of them go to Auschwitz. It is a massive bloodbath. So this is the position of German Jewry once the Nazis come to power. Now, I told you that there are two major concepts that were important to the Nazis. One was its anti-Semitism. The other was the issue of German expansion. Lebensraum was the term that was used. This was an idea really born in the late 19th century, early 20th century. It was the English, a number of English, let us say, geopoliticians or people, geographers, people who are very interested in great national power and linked it to geography. For the Germans, what Hitler said was took the position that Germany could not be a great nation. Germany, the Third Reich, would not last for 1,000 years unless Germany expanded to the east. This is one of the most important things I will tell you in this lecture series. Again, Germany had to expand to the east. So in November of 1937, Hitler laid out the plans. First will be Czechoslovakia, then will be Austria, and then will be Poland. Germany had to expand to the Ural Mountains. All of Eastern Europe and all of European Russia was to fall under German control. And Germany would exploit the human and natural resources of this part of Europe, eastern part of Europe, up to the Ural Mountains, and that would make Germany the greatest nation in the world. And indeed, he would do it. March 1936, he takes the Rhineland, that border area with France. March 38, this is the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. And then, late summer 38, Hitler declares to the world, either I get this part of Czechoslovakia, which in German is called the Sudetenland, where there are 3 million Germans living. Hitler says, if I don't get the Sudetenland, I will go to war. And Europe caves. Remember, this is the famous Munich Agreement. This is the time when Churchill is going to condemn the Chamberlain government. Chamberlain goes to Munich. The French foreign minister goes to Munich. And what do? They offer up Czechoslovakia on the altar of international peace. And that's what leads Churchill, remember, to make that famous statement. Addressing Chamberlain, he says, you had to choose between dishonor and war. You chose dishonor and you will have war. And that is exactly what's going to happen. Summer 1939, Hitler declares, if I don't get back the areas from Germany that were given to the new state of Poland, created at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, if I don't get this back, there will be war. Britain and France now pledge allegiance to Poland. We will go to war in defense of Poland. Now, Hitler has to be worried about that. And the reason for it was Hitler had written in Mein Kampf that the Kaiser had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The mistake was that he got Germany into a two-front war. Hitler indicated in Mein Kampf that if he was the leader of Germany and Germany was ever to get involved in another war, there would be no two-front war. And that's why, my friends, on August 22nd of 1939, the greatest diplomatic bombshell in European history in the modern period took place. Remember, here's the background. In the eyes of the Nazis, in the eyes of Hitler, he uses the term, in fact, in Mein Kampf, written as early as 1923. He doesn't refer to the Soviet Union as the Soviet Union. He says that the Soviet Union is the seat of the Judeo-Bolshevik menace. Bolshevism, Hitler argued, was another device that the Jews employed to enslave the world. Bolshevism was a Jewish ideology, said Hitler. We are unalterably opposed to the Soviet Union, but of course to the Bolshevik, to the communist menace. And in the eyes of the Soviet Union, the Nazi state was a state of fascist reptiles and crocodiles. So here are these two countries, hostile towards each other, really hostile. And yet on August 22nd, 1939, the world wakes up and hears about the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Sometimes it's called the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Treaty, or the von Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. Those are von Ribbentrop is the foreign minister of Germany, and Molotov, of course, is the foreign minister of the Soviet Union. How could it be? How could it be that the Nazi state would form a pact, a non-aggression treaty? Now, there was a hint of this, I must tell you, because the previous foreign minister of the Soviet Union was Jewish. And in the middle of 1939, an article appears in Pravda, the Soviet Party newspaper, in which that foreign minister is dismissed. Everybody thinks he's going up. He's going into the purges. No, no, no. Stalin was preparing to make an agreement with Hitler. And knowing full well Hitler would never deal with a Jewish foreign minister, we should have picked up on that. Nobody picks up on that. Molotov comes, they sign the pact. Hitler made Stalin an offer that he could not refuse. Hitler says to Stalin, these are secret. No one knows about this at the time. It's only you are not going to believe this. It's not until Gorbachev's time, in the period of Glasnost, that the whole terms of the Soviet Nazi non-aggression pact become evident to the Soviet people, the peoples of the Soviet Union. But now we will know it. We will know it in the West at the time in 1939. Here's the deal. Hitler tells Stalin, listen, if I go to war over Poland and the British and French come in and you remain neutral, you can have the eastern part of Poland and you can have Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. You can have all this territory that was lost even by the great Lenin during the Russian Revolution and the Civil War. How can Stalin refuse such an offer? In addition, Stalin has made a terrible mistake, a mistake that will cost him dearly, that we'll talk about next week. That is, Stalin believes correctly, in this sense he's right, that war between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union is inevitable. These are two antithetical states. They cannot live alongside of each other. There's going to be war. But here's Stalin's mistake. Stalin believes that the war most likely will come between 1945 and 1947. There's an outside chance it will come in 1943. He's dead wrong. But he does need time to prepare. And so that's why, in addition to the territorial gift to him, that's why he's going to do what he does. He agrees to the non-aggression treaty. The Germans invade Poland on September 1st of 1939. The British and French do absolutely nothing. They drop leaflets over Germany. They open a few artillery rounds, and that's the end of it. In 4 weeks' time, Poland disappears from the face of the earth. The Germans are in occupation. Now, listen to me, please, very carefully. We have a lot of material in a short period of time to do this. September 1st, 1939, the Germans invade Poland. September 17th, 1939, the Soviet Union stabs Poland in the back and invades Poland from the east. It's a catastrophe. Poland disappears. September 21st, listen, this is an important date in the Nuremberg trials after the war. A special communique goes out from Reinhard Heydrich, the deputy head of the SS, the head of the Gestapo, and the man who will be one of the architects of the final solution, the Holocaust. It is a special communique to SS commanders in Poland, telling them what they have to do. The Jews are to be rounded up, the Jews are to be placed in ghettos, and a time will come in the future when we will deal with what in German is das Endziel, the final goal or the final solution. Once again, this is what is called in German the Schnellbrief, the special delivery letter. And what's going to happen is, in fact, that the Jews are now ghettoized. In every town, in every village, in every city, within a short period of time, the Jews are going to be placed in ghettos. And according to the Schnellbrief that I just spoke to you about, the SS commanders are to create in every ghetto, there is to be a Jewish council. That council is called the Judenrat. And you put the umlaut, the two dots over the A, add an E, that's the plural. The Judenräte or the Jewish councils. This is the most controversial institution on the Jewish side in the history of the Holocaust. Were these men traitors? Did they deliver their people to the Nazis? Hannah Arendt, this great political scientist, remember, was sent by the New Yorker magazine to cover the Eichmann trial. She wrote a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a study in the banality of evil, in which she argued, of course, that the Nazis were the major culprits, but the men in the Judenrat, the Jewish councils, they were almost as guilty. They did whatever the Germans ordered. It was chutzpahdik of Hannah Arendt to really do that, to say that. This is a woman, she didn't read Polish, and she probably didn't understand Yiddish. She didn't understand the pressures that these people were under. So what's going to happen now is the Holocaust is filled with choices, my friends. Choices that you and I, thank God, have never had to make. Let me give you an example of the first choice. Then we'll get back to the Judenrat. September 18th, 19th, 20th, the Germans are about to surround Warsaw. If you're a Jew in Warsaw, what do? And remember, your decisions are irrevocable. If I stay in Warsaw, I have my family and my friends. I know the Germans are coming. They're going to take the city. Remember, nobody in his or her worst imagination can envision Auschwitz. Nobody knows that. It'll be hard, but we have our apartments, we have our businesses, we have our friends here. If I go to the east, fleeing the Germans, go to the Soviet zone, go as far east as I can. The Germans are strafing the roads. Will the peasants give me food? Will the peasants rape my wife and daughters? What do? In retrospect, and remember, that's the difference between our time and their time. In our time, every decision almost is revocable. I tell the students at union, you don't like my class? Change. You don't like union? You can switch. You get a job, you don't like the job? You get a new job. You can even change the marriage. You don't like the spouse? You find somebody else. But not in wartime. In wartime, you got to think quickly. And if you make the wrong decision, as we used to say in Brooklyn, you're dead as Clancy's nuts. It is as simple as that. The correct decision in retrospect is to get the hell out of Warsaw and go as far east as you can. And tens upon tens of thousands of Jews do that. But the bulk of the Jewish community in Warsaw stays in Warsaw. The leaders of the Warsaw Jewish community, they flee east. The great rabbis flee east. The leaders of the various Jewish political parties, they all flee east. The Jewish community, by and large, is left leaderless. And so when the Nazis take over Warsaw and they find a guy, Adam Chernyakov is his name, Adam Chernyakov. They make him, he has played a role in Jewish communal leadership. He's an engineer, but he's not one of the great leaders. They make him the Judenrat. They make him the leader, the chairman of the Warsaw Judenrat. And then we come to choices again. Chernyakov is told, get 21 other people. He goes to you or he goes to somebody else. Now you got to make another choice, right? Here's the choice. And the choice is, if I join the Judenrat, I become a member alongside of Chernyakov. I can get a better ration card. I may hold on to my apartment. I'll be privileged. On the other hand, if I join the Judenrat, will I be considered to be a traitor? Am I a collaborator with the Nazis? This is an issue here. A number of men choose, for whatever the reasons they choose. In November of 1940, the Jews of Warsaw and some of the surrounding areas, they are going to be placed in the Warsaw Ghetto. This is the largest of all of the ghettos. At its peak, there are 450,000 Jews in a very 1 or 2 square miles. It's 16 people to a room. It is absolutely horrendous. And the Germans control everything that comes in and everything that goes out, including food. The Germans control the amount of food that comes into the ghetto. And when the Germans are really getting rolling 6 months later, the caloric ration, the daily caloric ration that is given to the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto is 160 calories per day. You do not have to be a wizard of nutrition to understand what this is going to mean. It's going to mean massive starvation. In fact, even before the deportations take place, in July of 1942, 20% of the Warsaw Jewish community, the Warsaw Ghetto, is dead before the deportations. That's a good rule of thumb for all of the ghettos in German-occupied Poland. So 20% are dead, most from starvation, others from disease, and because the Nazis come into the ghettos from time to time and shoot people. So we are talking about, this is the beginning of genocide in Poland. Now the Jews, why aren't more Jews dead from the starvation? The Jews try. There are Jewish self-help organizations, Jewish social work organizations. They ration food. They obtain more food by one by hook or by crook. They do it. But for those who have written about the ghetto, in the ghetto and writing about life in the ghetto, they say that the real hero of the ghetto, the real heroes of the ghetto, are the smugglers. That is, there are 2 types of smugglers in the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, you remember I said to you less than 5 minutes ago that the Jewish leaders of the Jewish community, the leaders of the Jewish community in Warsaw, had fled Warsaw. These are people, and this is why this is so difficult for the Jews who are remaining in Warsaw. Those Jews who had led, these were the leaders of the Jewish political parties, the Bund, for example, the Zionist movement, and so on. A lot of these people had left, but these are the people that had connections on the Polish side. For example, the Bund, the leaders of the Jewish Bund, and the leaders of the Jewish Communist Party, and some Jewish businessmen. They had contacts on the Polish side, but they're all gone now. So who do you think remains in the ghetto? In the Jew, they're all in the ghetto, only 450,000 Jews in the ghetto. Who do you think has the connections? Jewish gangsters. Jewish gangsters have connections with Polish gangsters. And what they work out is they smuggle food into the ghetto. Now, you got to pay a heavy price for this. The Jewish gangsters have to pay a heavy price for it. but they're going to sell it at a very heavy price to the Jews in the ghetto. For those Jews who have managed to hold on to money or jewelry or gold and silver, they are going to obtain food. Some of the Jewish self-help organizations have some money available. They will get food. They will distribute it. And then there's small-scale smuggling. That is Jewish youngsters, usually Jewish boys, occasionally Jewish girls. They scamper over the ghetto walls. Remember, the ghetto is surrounded by walls and barbed wire. Somehow they get over there, or somehow they knock out some of the bricks in the wall and they scamper through. They bring out certain things that they can trade with Poles on the so-called Aryan side. And what's going to happen is that they get food. And that keeps the ghetto alive. At least keeps most of the people in the ghetto alive. It is no easy trick, I must tell you, for these youngsters or anybody else to smuggle food in. A German, years after the war, actually he wrote a diary, we find it years after the war, talks about an incident that he had. He's in the German army. They're occupying Warsaw. And he says one day, the commandant of his unit says, everybody's invited to my apartment. We're going to have schnapps, we're going to have food, and we're going to have girls. We're going to have women. And he comes. And they're having a great time. It's in the evening, a great time. It's in an apartment house that overlooks the Warsaw Ghetto. Then at about 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, the commandant says, Meine Herren, we're going to have some fun. They goes up to the roofs, to the roof of the apartment house. Rifles are handed out with scopes. And the evening's entertainment is to shoot the Jewish boys and girls who are trying to bring food and scamper over the walls, allowing them to get back into the ghetto. This is an impossible time that we're talking about. It is, in the words of one survivor who wrote about the Warsaw Ghetto, it is a time without precedent. You cannot understand what is happening in the Holocaust unless you understand this. This is something that the Jews had never experienced before. Remember, even in the worst of times, you could kiss the cross, or you could convert to Islam, and you can save yourselves. Not now. Not now. In addition to that, some of the Jews think, well, this is the remedievalization of Jewish life. They put us in the ghettos in the Middle Ages. We bargained with them. We paid them off. We bribed them. Not now. You can't do this with the Nazis. So again, it is a terrible situation for the Jews. A rumor spreads in the Warsaw Ghetto that the Jews are to be deported. Chernyakov was a decent man. There were people who hated him because he followed the German orders. He said, the reason being, if I don't do it, I'm going to get killed. And everybody in the Judenrat is going to get killed. I'll do what the Germans want as much as I can, and hopefully the war will come to an end and Germany will be defeated. And he writes in his diary, we only get the diary in the 1960s. That's Adam Chernyakov's diary. And he writes, the two things I'm going to tell you here to show you how bad things are in the Warsaw Ghetto. He writes of something that is the ultimate testimony to a community in distress. When you see this, you know whether it is the German prison of war camps for the Soviet soldiers, because they did the same thing, or the Jews in the ghettos, particularly in the Warsaw Ghetto. If you see it happening, and someone says to you, or like Chernyakov says in his diary, there were a few instances of this, you know that there were more. What I'm talking about here, I don't mean to shock you, it's early in the morning. What I mean to talk to you about is Jewish cannibalism. The Jews are eating their dead. It doesn't happen often. It's a rare phenomenon, but it does happen. And it's the ultimate testimony to how bad the situation is. So you have that on the one hand. The Germans are bringing hellfire down on the other. It is, what can I say? That is, again, a time without precedent. So the ghetto is there. The rumor spreads that the Jews are going to be deported. And Chernyakov, a good and decent man. Chernyakov also said in his diary, that's the second thing. So he says, I will do, in effect, he's saying, I'll do what the Germans want. except I will not facilitate the deportation of the Jewish community. And he writes in his diary that in my desk on the right-hand side is a bottle of cyanide. I will take the cyanide. I will take the cyanide if they order me to do that. I will not do it. He makes the rounds and asks all the high-ranking German officials, are the Jews going to be deported? And the answer is no. It's a stupid rumor. Don't believe it. On July 22nd of 1942, Chernyakov is told by the Germans, there will be a massive deportation of the Jews. And you are to do it. You are to call upon the Jewish police, and they are to round up 6 Jews each policeman of the Judenrat, the Jewish police. There's a Jewish police force, no weapons. They have batons, but no weapons. They are to round up 6 Jews and bring them to the Umschlagplatz. That's the place where the trains are coming in that will take the Jews away from Warsaw. He takes the cyanide, commits suicide. The Germans come into the ghetto. The Jewish police, in order to save themselves and their families, collaborate with the Germans and round up the Jews and take them to the Umschlagplatz. From July 22nd of 1942 to September 13th of 1942, over 300,000 Jews are taken to the Umschlagplatz and they are sent to Treblinka. The Warsaw Jews do not go to Auschwitz. They go to Treblinka, not far from Bialystok. That's where they go. In some ways, this is the ultimate death camp. Very little labor is done there. And the number of Jews who die there is going to be, we believe, because the Jews are not coming only from Warsaw, they're coming from all over. The figure may be as high as 800,000 to 900,000 Jews. This is a death factory. This is death on the cheap. And it's done quickly. By on the cheap, it doesn't take many Germans to do it. So the Jews are living in the Warsaw Ghetto. They're trying desperately to save themselves. In microcosm, this is what's happening to Jews all over German-occupied Poland. The Jews are being sent to various extermination camps. And so, again, in that period, July 22nd to September 13th, the Jews are going to go. Again, those who do not have special work permits, but again, over 300,000 Jews are going to go to Treblinka, where they are gassed and cremated within an incredibly short period of time. They get off the trains, 3 hours later, they're up the chimney or they're all dead in one way or another. Now, the question arises, it has always arisen, my friends. Did they go like sheep to the slaughter? Was there any Jewish resistance here? And the answer is yes. And the question, the statement that has to be made, and I will make it to you, is when one looks at the obstacles to Jewish resistance, one is astonished that there was any Jewish resistance whatsoever. What do I mean by the obstacles? First of all, there is on the part of the Jews the failure to believe. People cannot believe. This is true in the ghettos. It's even true in the concentration camps and even in the extermination camps. And people have a difficulty in believing that in the middle of the 20th century, the phenomenon of genocide, mass murder of people on the basis of their religion or their alleged race, and people cannot believe it, how do you think people in the United States feel? And people in Canada and Great Britain feel? We will deal with this in another lecture. But any discussion of, let us say, Jewish behavior in German-occupied Europe to what the Germans were doing has to factor in this failure to believe. And although we'll pick this up in a later lecture, I will also tell you that when we talk about the Roosevelt administration and the American Jewish responses to the Holocaust, I'll make the point to you. If they didn't believe in German-occupied Europe, what do you think? How do you think they're going to believe here now, in our own country, 3,500, 4,000 miles away? Again, for the third time, but it is so important that it has to be mentioned 3 times, this failure to believe. And second, Nazi duplicity. Now, we're talking about the obstacles to Jewish resistance. So there is, again, failure to believe and Nazi duplicity. The Nazis were not stupid. Now, it is, again, I'm not being condescending. Believe me, I'm not, my friends. We know each other now because I've done another series with you. I'm not being condescending here. But it is an example of American naivete that a program like Hogan's Heroes could ever appear on television. There, the Nazis are depicted as buffoons. They were not buffoons. And in fact, for students of the Third Reich, you can take a position that the most efficient aspect or institution or behavior of the Nazis in the entire history of the war was its campaign against the Jews, the final solution. Hitler was a terrible war leader. And while German generals are very good and the SS had some competent people, they're all in competition with each other. And that hampered the German war effort. But when it came to the murder of the Jews, the Germans were very, very efficient. So there's Nazi duplicity. Let me give you an example here. It doesn't pertain to the Warsaw Ghetto. You can argue this is when Chernyakov is told that the Jews are going to be deported, the Germans have a special vocabulary. The Germans they're not going to tell him that Jews are going to be deported. They're going to be resettled. Somewhere in the East, they'll be turned into effective workers. When the Jews of Salonika, the pearl of the Sephardic diaspora, 55,000 Jews in Salonika in Greece in April of 1943 are rounded up and put on trains. The male heads of family will be handed deeds to land in the Ukraine. They'll be told, we're going to get you out of Greece. We're going to make you productive farmers. You won't be parasites anymore. They're not going to Ukraine. They're going to Auschwitz. And in the space of 72 to 96 hours, nearly all of those 55,000 Jews from Salonika are going to die. The Nazis were not buffoons, and they were very efficient and very competent in the murder of the Jews. And then there is, of course, the problem of obtaining weapons. In the United States, any idiot who doesn't have a criminal record can obtain a 22. It's not difficult to obtain weapons here in our country. Even before the war in Europe, it's very hard to obtain a weapon. So the Jews have problems in obtaining weapons. And when they obtain weapons, they don't know how to use them. And then you got to get the ammunition. Again, not an easy thing to do here. And then the Nazi policy of collective responsibility. I'll give you an example. And every Jew has to weigh this in when he or she decides to resist or to flee the ghetto through the sewers. So here's an example here. A Polish collaborator with the Nazis is walking through the ghetto. He's shot. A Jewish underground unit shoots him. You know what the Nazi response is? They go to the apartment house in front of which the shooting took place. They go to the apartment house. They take out every male Jew, there was only Jews in the apartment house, every male from the age of 6 months to 65 years old, take them away and kill them. If you resist, and when we get to the world of the concentration camps, anybody who tries to escape from a camp has to know that those who were in the barracks with him or her, those people are going to die. That's what collective responsibility is all about. And any Jew that resists the Germans has got to worry that his family will pay a very, very heavy price. And then we come to the most loaded issue of them all. Hang on to me, my friends. Hang on now very, very closely. This is the issue of Polish-Jewish relations during the war. The problem that the Jews confront, and we'll deal with this again and again, is not merely are the Germans out to kill them, but that in every country occupied by the Germans, without a single exception, and that includes Denmark and Bulgaria, there were always people who were prepared to collaborate with the Nazis. The war against the Jews was a pan-European phenomenon. Everywhere in German-occupied Europe, for a variety of reasons. The Jews are communists, the Jews, they killed Christ, whatever it may be. An envy of the Jews, it's always there. And a belief, greed, the desire to get Jewish property, it all plays a role. In Poland, there's some special things that are involved here. Number one, the Roman Catholic Church. The church in Poland was very, very anti-Semitic. Now I don't want to play semantics here. Anti-Semitism is a racial condemnation of the Jews. If the Jews converted to Roman Catholicism, the church was not opposed to them. But the church was anti-Jewish. If you remain Jewish, you're contemptible. So in the second half of the 1930s, the chief Catholic primate of Poland is going to write a pastoral letter that was read in every church in Poland, in which he harangues the Jews, harangues against the Jews. The Jews are communists. The Jews are this. They have no business ethics. You should have no relationship with the Jews. The Jews are pornographers. The Jews really are going to seduce our young women and girls. Then, in the letter, a very fine line is drawn. The fine line is you don't resort to acts of physical violence against the Jews. But the point I'm trying to tell you here is anti-Semitism was endemic in Poland. It pervaded every element in Polish society. This is not to say that all Poles were anti-Semites. That is not to say. The PPS, the Polish Socialist Party, was not anti-Semitic. But large numbers of Poles were anti-Semitic, or they hated Jews. They boycotted against Jews in the interwar period. There were pogroms against Jews. 1,500 Jews died in pogroms between 1920 and 1939. There were, again, boycotts against Jews, pogroms against Jews, riots against Jews in the cities. It was Poland. Anti-Semitism was alive and well in German-occupied Poland. What's going to happen, of course, I keep saying that I use that expression, I shouldn't, but what does happen is that this anti-Semitism of the interwar period carries over into the post-war, into the war period. And so many, many Poles, how many we do not know. Listen to my language, please, my friends, very, very clearly, very closely. I'm not saying most Poles. I am certainly not saying all Poles. But I am saying that many Poles will collaborate with the Germans. Some of it is for greed. Some of it is envy. Some is for religious-based reasons. And then that linkage with communism. Now, here I have to go back. Remember I told you on September 17th of 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Eastern Poland. That was part of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. There were pictures of Polish Jewish youngsters greeting the Soviet soldiers, the Red Army soldiers, with flowers. Of course they were greeting them with flowers. Better to be under Soviet control than to be under Nazi control. They looked upon the Soviet Union and the Red Army as defenders of them. But those pictures of Jewish youngsters giving flowers to the people in the tanks, the Red Army soldiers who occupied the eastern part of Poland, the Nazis will have those pictures, and they'll publish them all over the German-occupied areas of Poland. The Jews are communists. This is the argument in the interwar period. The fact of the matter is, the overwhelming majority of Jews were not communists. They wouldn't have anything to do with communism. But remember what I told you last week. There's a small communist party, 50,000 communists in all of Poland out of 30 million people, but about half of those people are Jewish. And some of the leaders of the Polish Communist Party were Jewish. In the eyes of large numbers of Poles, the Jews are commies. The Jews are Reds, and these are people that we can have nothing to do with. In fact, if the Germans kill them, so what? It doesn't make any difference. So how does collaboration manifest itself, especially in Warsaw? There are a group of people, young people, Polish youngsters. They are known in Polish as schmalcowniki. Here you see the linkage between Polish and Yiddish. Schmaltz. Schmaltz is fat. What these youngsters did was to they would go on the Aryan side of the walls that isolated the Warsaw Ghetto. And if Jews if they thought someone coming out of the ghetto and they thought that person was Jewish, they would sweat them down. Give me money or you're going to die. I'll turn you over to the Germans. Give me sex from a Jewish woman or girl, or I'll turn you over to the Germans. That's form of collaboration. There is a police unit, a Polish police unit, that helps the Germans police the ghettos. There are people who turn over Jews. So they don't give weapons. They give very little weapons. The main Polish underground unit is the Armia Krajowa, the AK. The AK will not give great support to the Jews. Most Poles they're not apathetic. And maybe many of them were not hostile. But their position is difficult too. I'm not an apologist for the Poles. I'm not. It's interesting when I talk to my friends who are Polish Jewish survivors. Many of them hate the Poles. Many of them hate the Poles. But yet when I tell them something, I've interviewed many people. I've read of the voluminous literature. I've read a good part of it. I've seen the memoir literature. Let me tell you what you learn, among other things. The Polish anti-Semitism was great. There is no question about that. But here's when I stun my Polish Jewish friends. They know what I'm saying is the truth. They don't like to admit it, but they say it's the truth. The anti-Semitism is there. The Polish collaboration was there. But no Jew who survived in German-occupied Poland, who is hiding out in the forest, in the sewers, hiding out anonymously, whatever it may be, no Jew who survived in German-occupied Poland during the Second World War could have survived without somewhere along the line being helped by a sympathetic Pole. I'll say that again. You could not survive as a Jew hiding out in German-occupied Poland. You couldn't have survived unless somewhere along the line you were helped by a sympathetic Pole. There were Poles that helped Jews. Hundreds of Poles were hanged by the Nazis. The penalty in Western Europe for sheltering as a Jew is they send you to Dachau. That's in Western Europe, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands and Italy. They send you to Dachau, or if you were a little bit luckier, they send you to a prison. In German-occupied Poland, the penalty for sheltering a Jew is death for you and for your family. I tell the students when they ask me, what would you have done, Professor Berk? And you know what? If I were Polish non-Jew, Polish Catholic, and a Jewish family came to me, would you hide me? Here's what I would not do. I would not turn them over to the Nazis. I would not sexually exploit a Jewish woman or a Jewish girl. That I'm pretty confident that I would, these things I would not do. But would I shelter that Jewish family? If the penalty for me was that I would die, my family would die, and all my property would be expropriated? I'm not sure. There's a fundamental asymmetry at work in the Holocaust. It's in Poland, but it's everywhere else. If you wanted to betray 100 Jews in German-occupied Poland, all you had to do is to make an anonymous telephone call to the Gestapo and say, in such and such a building, in such and such a street, there's a Jewish family or a group of Jews that are hiding out. You could do it anonymously, but if you wanted a reward, because the Nazis were offering rewards, well, you could do that. So that's an anonymous telephone call. To save a single Jew, you risked everything. And remember, I speak to you as someone who's fairly traditional in my religious beliefs. The sign of the covenant is the sign of death for our people, for our males. Nobody else in Europe, with the exception of Bosnian Muslims, nobody else in Europe circumcised their males. So if you take the Jewish boy in and you dress him up as a Pole, and even if he speaks fluent Polish, first of all, you got to get extra food. Food's in short supply. And the grocer says, why are you buying extra food? And then in addition to that, you send the kid to school, right? Got to go. He speaks a fluent Polish. He may look like a Pole. But when he goes to urinate and he pulls down his pants and the kids see that he's circumcised, he's dead. And the Germans had such little or had such great contempt, put it this way, had such great contempt for Jews and Poles, that what they would often do, if they suspected that someone was a Jew, they'd pull him aside, ask him to pull down his pants, and if he was circumcised, he'd either be shot on the spot or they'd take him away to be deported to an extermination camp. So the crux of the matter is that there's a good deal of anti-Semitism, there's a good deal of collaboration, but there were people that helped Jews. And hundreds of Poles were actually hanged because they did help Jews. There was even an organization called Żegota, that was the code name, that saved tens of thousands of Jews. The most famous of one of the lead people of the Polish Catholics within Żegota, this is a Polish Catholic organization, was the woman who they made a mini-series on television, Irina Sendler. This is a woman who saved thousands of Jews. So the collaboration is there. Only an idiot would deny the collaboration. And some idiot Poles today say there was no collaboration whatsoever. Everybody lives on the base of Bubamites, fairy tales. So what's the myth? The Bubamites are in Poland to this day. Yeah, the Jews suffered. We knew about the killing of the Jews. And we knew that even some Poles collaborated. But most of us, we did everything that we could to save the Jews. That's a crock. Some Jews were saved by sympathetic Poles. Kol hakavod to them. But there was a large-scale collaboration, and there was, again, a great deal of apathy. So when it comes to the fighting that actually takes place, the Warsaw Uprising on April 19th of 1943 is the first urban uprising against the Nazis. These people are slaughtered. Only about 600 people are fighting. These are the people who have survived the deportations, have hidden out, or had work permits. They rise. They have guns. Somehow they've got guns, but they don't have enough guns for the 600. They've got probably 2 machine guns, some repeating rifles and pistols, and a shortage of ammunition. What is remarkable is there was any resistance whatsoever. And it's the first urban uprising against the Nazis. The slogan of the underground, the slogan of the Jews in the ghetto, which is carried into the underground, is to live with honor and to die with honor. And that's what the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto do. And it's not the only revolt in Poland. It is in Białystok, there are revolts. In Vilna, which at the time was part of Poland, that too, there are going to be revolts there. And there are Jews hiding out in the forest, Jews fighting in the partisan units. The idea that the Jews went like sheep to the slaughter, it's not true. Most Jews did go. Most Jews, either they did not know what they were doing, or they thought the situation was futile, there was resistance was not done. Or I leave you with this, and then I'll open. I know we're running late in terms of questions. Here's a question, a difficult question to answer. Difficult question for me to ask, as someone who's fairly traditional as religious beliefs. Was there something in the Jewish religious tradition that worked against resistance? Were there people who thought, who came to Hashem will provide? Were there people who just gave up fate, destiny? Last thing I will tell you, and that'll wrap it all up for you. I'm giving a lecture in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. A guy in his, this is a long time, a guy in his 60s or 70s comes up to me and tells me about an incident. Here's the important point about the incident. One, we're in a cattle car. We come from a shtetl. The Germans had rounded up. They put us in a cattle car. Oh, the landsmen are there. Oh, the people in the shtetl are there. Some are praying. Some are crying. Boom, boom, boom. And he tells me, my father says to me, listen, you're small and you're thin. When the train slows down, go underneath. We'll take up the slats, the wooden slats from the bottom of the car, and you open up the latch. You climb up and you open up the latch to the door, and we will jump out because the Germans are going to kill us. And the man says to me, I did exactly what my father said. I was able to do it. I got under the train slowed down. I got under the train. I opened up the latch. And then my father turns to the people. We got to get out of here. The Germans are going to kill us. Some people jump and some people daven. They pray. Now, again, is there something in the tradition? I don't know. I'm not giving you an answer. Talk to the rabbi about that. Some people say maybe even they could have been secular. It's Beshet. It's destiny. Whatever happens, happens. There are many people that think that down to the present day. So some people daven and some people jump out. And then to wrap it up, they jump out, they don't know where the hell they are, and they see a kid, a Polish kid, riding on a bicycle. The kid sees them. Should we kill the kid, they say. Some of them say, we got to kill him because he'll inform upon us. Well, the kid pleads for his life and says, I don't hate you. I know you're suffering here. I will help you. There's a river not far from here, and there may be some rowboats that the fishermen have left. I'll find out if there are rowboats there. And so the Jews said, do I let him go? Or maybe he can help us because we don't know where we are. They can't bring themselves to kill him, so they let him go. He comes back. There are rowboats there at the river. He takes them with the rowboats, and he gets them across the river into a forest. They survive. That was a good poll. The Schmaltzovniki, the collaborationists, the Polish police that collaborate, and the fear, the tremendous fear that if you really are sheltering Jews, I'm not an apologist for the Poles. Do not misconstrue what I'm saying. But you can't make a blanket statement about the Poles. All right, my friends, I've taken you from German-occupied Poland. If you think this was bad, well, things are going to come. Because we're going to talk next week about the roll of the dice, for want of a better cliche, by Adolf Hitler. This is the greatest mistake he will make in the war. It will cost him his life. It will cost Germany the war. It is the decision to carry out what in German is called Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22nd of 1941. Why he did this, what happens in the war, particularly to the Jews of the German-occupied areas of the Soviet Union, that is what we will talk about next week. I apologize again, but if you have stay the course, I'm willing to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. So we're just going to do truly like 2 or 3 questions that kind of sum up everything we've discussed. And don't worry, the post-program email is going to be robust. Ooh, that rhymed. Okay. So the first one is, I think, it's hard to listen to that and not notice the similarities happening in the world today. So we had a question.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's another issue with similarities in the world today. Uh,
Okay.
my suggestion is to deal with what the material that I covered in the class, because we can
Okay.
go off. It'll get us off onto a tangent, and it really will not serve the interest. If they're talking about anti-Semitism today, yes, no one can deny.
No, it was
But
more about
concentrate
fascism.
on the war.
It was more about the rise of fascism and
Yes, go ahead.
how the rise of fascism today is different than in Hitler's time, and if we need to shift our response based on what we learned from that time.
Again, it's a good question. It really is not the type of question that we should be dealing with now. The answer is, very succinctly, is the Islamofascism has fastened on another aspect of anti-Semitism. In an earlier period, the Jews killed Christ. That was one of the axioms of the hostile anti-Jewish movement, or the Jews were communists. Now the argument is the Jews are bad people because they're Zionists. Zionism is a pernicious ideology. It has to be destroyed. The state of Israel is a renegade state, and anybody who supports the state of Israel ought to be pushed out of any form of public life. But that's not what we should be talking about.
Right. So do you feel then that anti-Semitism and fascism go hand in hand, or can they be separated?
Nazism, if you talk about it, fascism, if you want to use fascism and Nazism synonymously, scholars would tell you shouldn't do it. But if you want to use it, anti-Semitism is an integral part of fascism. Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. We had other questions about the Polish Jews that survived with the help of Poles. Do we know how many are righteous among the nations? How many, an idea of how many Polish Jews were actually saved?
All right. We think that about, let's say, somewhere between 30 and 50,000 Polish Jews were saved in one way or another. That figure may be too high, but that in terms of the righteous Gentiles, Yad Vashem has done a very good job of finding some of these people, hearing about these people, verifying the evidence, and there are more trees planted in the street of the righteous Gentiles at Yad Vashem for Poles than for any other group.
Mm.
So that has to be weighed in. But again, I don't want to minimize Polish collaboration. It was a problem here.
Yes.
In fact, it's so much of a problem that the Polish underground, early in the war, is going to send a letter to the Polish government in exile talking about the mood of many Poles. And the argument is, this Hitler, this is not the language that is used, but this is the thrust of what they're saying. This Hitler's a bastard, and we're going to deal with him. But you got to give credit to Hitler. We ought to build a monument to him when the war is over, because he did something that we could never do. He got rid of the Jews. So there were Poles that thought that way.
Right. I think now, even if you talk to, well, at least in my experience, non-Jewish Poles versus non-Jewish Germans, the way that they were educated about their country's participation in the Holocaust is completely different. Um, okay. Okay. And then, sorry, let me see what the next one is. Okay. In the early 1930s, when Hitler's coming to power, do you feel like there was a point in time that this could have been stopped, or was this conclusion
All right.
inevitable at some point?
All the questions are good. Believe me, I didn't mean to ridicule anybody when I said we shouldn't deal with that. Sure, it could have been stopped. It could have been stopped as early as March of 1936 when Hitler marched into the Rhineland. So much. Here, you want to see it now? How it plays out now? What do you do with Iran? Do you bomb Cog Island? Do you destroy the oil facilities? Do you destroy the desalination plants? Do you go in? A lot of it has to do with will. A lot of it has to do with will. The Nazis could have been stopped. With one arm, again, I'm speaking a cliche, with one arm tied behind their back. The French army could have defeated the German army in March of 1936. They could have defeated them in March of 1938. The problem, of course, was, let me give you these figures. I think I gave them last time. It doesn't make sense. What I'm going to tell you doesn't make sense when you see the figures, unless you see the figures. 1,336,000 Frenchmen died in the First World War. 800,000 Brits died in the First World War. No one wants to go to war again. That's the problem. And there is the belief, remember, hope springs eternal, right? That's the hope springs eternal. And so there is the belief we can negotiate with the Nazis. We can negotiate with them. We can appease the Nazis. Had we done this in 1914, maybe we would have avoided World War I. Maybe we can do it now, appease Hitler. Maybe appeasing the Kaiser would have been successful. Appeasing Hitler just whets his appetite. So what they do, no one wants to go into the meat grinder again. People don't want war again. And they don't prepare for war. And the result is they have the means to do it. They don't have the will to stop the Nazis. The question is a good one, goes right to the heart. In the early 1930s, at Oxford, students at Oxford swore, they took what is called the Oxford Oath. They swore, this is in the early 1930s, 15 years after the end of the First World War, they swore never again would they die for king and country. A wave of pacifism sweeps over Europe and the United States as well. And that's going to be a problem. The answer to your question is, could it have been stopped? The answer is yes. And you want to come up to the present time? Could Iran have been stopped early on? You bet your last buck Iran could have been stopped, either by Israel or by the United States or by both. The problem with democratic countries is they always wait until the last minute. And that's always a problem.
Right. Well, on that uplifting note, we are going to say goodbye. Thank you so much to everyone for hanging with us and staying for the extra time, and to Professor Berk as well for being willing to stay late. And I hope to see all of you next Sunday back here for the next session. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.